Hello, I'm Gwen Eiffel. Welcome to the Washington Week Webcast Extra. I'm joined around the table by John Dickerson of Slate Magazine and CBS News, Susan Davis of USA Today, Todd Purdom of Politico and Vanity Fair, and Christy Parsons of Tribune Newspapers. One of the president's small bore initiatives this week involved job training. Vice President Biden was tasked with, quote, immediate shareholder consultation. I love that. And in general, the president created at least the illusion of movement. But what is the reality, Christy?
Well, the reality is that Vice President Biden is going to do a summit, and he's going to study the federal job training programs with an eye toward making them more efficient. Now, the White House, of course, says this does have actual effect. They think they can make job training programs more efficient, and they can phase out the ones that aren't working and concentrate resources on those that are. But really, what they would like is, more expansive action by Congress that would make a difference on their income inequality agenda. I
was watching Joe Biden's face closely when he announced this, and I thought, wow, he was thinking, goody, I get to run a commission. This is great. That's just what vice presidents exist to do. Yeah. Todd, I want to ask you a little bit about someone who is leaving Washington after years and actually making some impact, and that's Henry Waxman, in 24 years, Congressman from
40 years.
40
and
years.
He's the last of the class of 74, the Watergate baby class. He and his colleague from Northern California, George Miller, are both retiring. And one of the interesting things about Congressman Waxman's achievements is that his name is attached to really every important liberal initiative of the past 4 decades, right up to the Affordable Care Act. But he often managed to make these achievements during Republican administrations because he could, in fact, get support, work together. And he's, small in stature, but he'll be one of those people who it will take a lot to replace him in Congress.
Why do people keep leaving? It seems, is it just what happens at this point?
I think he's said, effectively, and just Congressman Miller, it's not as much fun anymore.
Yeah.
And they don't see any prospect of the Democrats getting the majority anytime soon, and it's much more fun to be a committee chairman than to be the ranking member.
That's basically a concession of that.
It's a concession, and also, it's God bless him, 40 years is a nice round number, and we know that there are some people who've stayed for their 48th and 54th and 60th, it's too long. So.
And didn't necessarily add anything to their experience. I want to talk to you, Sue, about Congress actually did something this week. I mean, there was actually legislation passed that's going to affect people's lives, and that's the Farm Bill. Yeah. It actually affects what kind of food you have in your refrigerator, what kind of lunch your kids eat, and what kind of crops that farmers are allowed to grow or can't grow, and what agribusiness gets. I mean, it's a big deal.
Yeah, it's one of the great sort of uncovered policy fights of the past 2 years. It spanned over 2 Congresses. It was alive and dead more times than probably the healthcare law during that long fight. And it literally affects the price of milk that you buy at the grocery store. I think the 2 major things that it did was it tackled one of the sacred cows of the Farm Bill was crop subsidies to farmers. They cut subsidies to farmers, and then they also reduced what we now call the SNAP program, which is food stamps. And I think
not by as much as they were talking about.
Not by as much as they want, but still enough to make a lot of people angry about it. I think that this bill was a great metaphor for the sort of battles we've seen in this Congress, in that it started at such a pitched partisan battle. It got to a middle ground. It passed with a governing coalition. And I think it taught a lot of lawmakers, particularly in the House, where almost half of the chamber is a relatively new member serving less than 3 years, that governing is hard and progress is incremental. So it's a hugely significant piece of legislation that affects all of our lives. And it was a turning point for this Congress. And I think it's a good tone to set the Congress on, particularly following the spending bill they passed in January, that people, they're starting to learn that they like doing things and that people like to see their government work.
Yeah. John, I want to talk to you about the story that never seems to go away, and it's just up the highway here in New Jersey, and that's Governor Chris Christie. Shoes keep dropping about this, bridge saga, and what is the latest thing that we know tonight?
Well, you're right. Shoes keep dropping because we have so many different investigations.
Right.
There's U.S. Attorney there in the General Assembly. There's also federal noodling about this. What happened tonight is that David Wildstein, who was the top Port Authority official who basically initiated the traffic study to stop traffic on the George Washington Bridge, the most trafficked bridge in the world, as political retribution against the mayor of Fort Lee because he didn't endorse Governor Christie. What Mr. Wildstein said, what his lawyer said, in a letter was that nothing about the central claim, nothing about the central plot to the plot of retribution. But what he did say was a shot at Chris Christie's credibility. And what he said was that Chris Christie's claim that when there were these traffic problems were ongoing, that he knew nothing about them, that he only knew about this after the traffic problems had happened. He learned about it in the press reports, that wasn't true. And the reason that matters is that Chris Christie has said, I knew nothing about this.
In a 2-hour press conference.
In a 2-hour press conference. He has basically tried to build a wall around himself, saying of a number of very strong claims. And to the extent that any of those individual claims gets a little shaky, then his entire defense potentially is called into question. And so this was undermining his credibility. Now, we have no sense of the evidence here. This could be just lawyerly gamesmanship and game playing.
And he denies it again.
And Governor Christie's office put out a lawyerly statement in which he said, I knew nothing about the underlying plot, and Mr. Wildstein says nothing to the contrary. And he said, as I said in these press conferences, I didn't know about what was going on. It didn't take care of every possible question raised by this lawyer letter. And so there are still questions out there, which meant if we thought there were going to be a lot of shoes for this number of things, we've now added a possible. We're getting into Imelda Marcos territory here of shoe dropping.
The most interesting part about the story to me is this guy Wildstein is a guy who had been widely described as Chris Christie's high school friend. And the day of the marathon press conference, Governor Christie went out of his way to say, this guy is no friend of mine. I didn't know him. He sat at the other table. I was with the popular kids. I was a football player. So he dissed this friend or acquaintance of his. And now it looks like it's payback time. You hate when that happens. Thank you, everybody. Stay online and read what else our panelists are reporting on. And we'll see you next week on the Washington Week Webcast Extra.